It's Saturday, March the 15th, and you are watching WION World is One. Good morning, Asia, and good evening, America. Time now for Wild DNA, American Joker. Let's start with our top stories. President Vladimir Putin says Russia will ensure the safety of Ukrainian troops in the Kursk region if they choose to surrender. This comes soon after US President Donald Trump urges Putin to spare Ukrainian forces. US President Donald Trump's West Asia envoy Steve Witkoff dismisses Hamas's offer to release captive American soldier and 4 bodies, says Iran-backed group is making very bad bet as the deadline nears. The US administration expels South African ambassador Ibrahim Rasool, calls him a persona non grata. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Rasool is no longer welcome in America. A pilot killed after a helicopter strikes a power line and crashes into a reservoir in northeastern Ohio. The cause of the crash remains under investigation. India and Bangladesh hold naval exercise in the Bay of Bengal. The patrol is part of the 2025 edition of the Bongo Saga exercise. Pakistan Crypto Council has been officially launched, this in a move to regulate and integrate blockchain technology and digital assets in the country's financial landscape. SpaceX launches a fresh crew to the International Space Station, sets the stage for NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sunita Williams to return home after 9 months. Let's start with Russia, where Russian President Vladimir Putin has called on Ukrainian troops fighting in the Kursk region to surrender. This shortly after US President Donald Trump urged him to spare the lives of the Ukrainian troops. Trump says his envoy held productive talks with Putin on the proposed 30-day ceasefire, even as Russia's counteroffensive intensifies in Kursk. Russia claims to have retaken Sudzha, the biggest town in the Kursk region. These are the images of Sudzha in ruins. This marks a significant shift in the ongoing 3-year-old war. The key town in Kursk was captured by Ukraine in August last year. Ukraine's top military commander, General Alexander Syrskyi, says Russian aircraft conducted so many strikes on Kursk that Sudzha has been almost completely destroyed. Russia claims it has intensified evacuation of civilians from Sudzha. In a video released by Russia, evacuees can be seen in a temporary accommodation point where they receive psychological support. Further, Russia has announced that its forces have regained control of 28 settlements in western Kursk over the past week, while Ukraine has reported repelling 22 Russian attacks in that region. As the fierce fighting rages on in the Kursk region, President Putin has called on Ukrainian troops fighting in Kursk to surrender. This was in response to Trump's call. He went on to say that the Ukrainian troops will be guaranteed life if they lay down their arms.
для эффективной реализации.
In order to effectively implement the call of the President of the United States of America, we need a corresponding order from the military and political leadership of Ukraine to its military units to lay down their arms and surrender.
This comes after Trump wrote on his social media platform Truth Social that he has strongly requested Putin that the lives of Ukrainian soldiers be spared. A direct conversation between the two leaders is yet to take place, but Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff met with the Russian president in Moscow on Thursday. Trump said in his post that they had a very good and productive discussion. Later, at Joint Base Andrews outside Washington, Trump said, and I quote, "Some pretty good vibes are coming from Russia in talks to reach a ceasefire."
From the standpoint about a ceasefire and ultimately a deal, some pretty good vibes coming out of Russia.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has reiterated the need for concessions, calling on both Ukraine and Russia to make compromises. After the G7 talks in Canada, Rubio said that the only way to end the war is through negotiations, which involves both sides making concessions.
That there has to be some level of concessions. What those concessions are remains to be seen. That'll have to be part of the negotiation. But it's not going to be helpful to enter into those negotiations making blanket statements that may give an excuse for one side or the other not to participate in it.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that diplomacy efforts are moving towards end of war, closer to peace. He says Ukraine has accepted the American proposal of unconditional silence in the sky, at sea, and on the front. Zelensky further said that he had discussed the state of diplomacy with French President Emmanuel Macron, reaffirming that Ukraine has clear support from France. European nations are convening in Kiev's support amid growing worries over Washington causing up to Moscow. A social media post, Macron also said he had discussed the ceasefire proposal with Zelensky and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Macron has called on Moscow to stop its acts of violence, accept the ceasefire proposal made by Washington and Kiev, and stop making statements aimed at delaying the process. Starmer has also accused Putin of not taking ceasefire attempts seriously, stressing that he cannot be allowed to play games with Trump's deal. Dr. Charles Kupchan is a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, or the CFR. He's now joining us live from Washington, D.C. Dr. Kupchan, welcome to Wild DNA, and it's good to see you. Let's try and dissect these two statements, or developments, if you like. President Trump urges President Putin to spare Ukrainian troops on the front lines, all of them, and in turn, the Russian leader is telling the troops fighting in Kursk to surrender so that they can be spared. Your reaction?
Well, we don't know exactly what's going on the ground in Kursk, but it looks like the Russians are advancing, are surrounding Ukrainian troops that are still in that southern region of Russia, and probably have the combat capability to push the Ukrainians out. And I think one sign of whether we're going to see Putin show more flexibility, be ready to make some concessions, is whether he lets those troops return to Ukraine or whether he captures them and holds them as prisoners or hostages for the negotiations. Right now, Putin has indicated he's ready to talk, but he's also putting out conditions on those troops and on other issues, which make it clear that it may be quite some time before we get a ceasefire, if in fact we actually get there.
Dr. Kupchan, now that you've mentioned it, I wanted to talk about it, but now you've mentioned it, concessions. The world is still waiting with bated breath the much anticipated Trump-Putin talk, but even that could happen, or even before that could happen, America, through its Secretary of State Marco Rubio, has reiterated the need for concessions, calling on both Ukraine and Russia to make compromises. Your thoughts?
Well, we don't actually know the details of what's being discussed. And I think it's a bit concerning that in his statements this week, Mr. Putin, although he said he was open to the agreement, also talked about caps on the mobilization of Ukrainian troops, no more Western weapons flowing to Ukraine. Those are demands that the Ukrainians simply cannot comply with because it would leave Ukraine exposed. It would allow Russia to regenerate while Ukraine simply has to sit on its hands. And so I think one concession from Putin will have to be to allow Ukraine to build the capability to defend itself so that Russia doesn't try this again. And perhaps in return, the Ukrainians could say, we will agree not to use force, not to use violence to try to retake those parts of Ukraine that are currently under Russian occupation.
We'll have to wait and see what happens, and we'll also have to wait and see if this ceasefire or truce talks will indeed happen. I've been talking to Dr. Charles Kupchan. He's a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Dr. Kupchan, good to see you. Thank you for talking to us today.
Good to see you. Good night.
As the ceasefire and hostage negotiations continue between Israel and Hamas, the Iran-backed group has made a fresh offer to release an Israeli-American hostage held captive and the remains of 4 others. This comes as Israel continued its onslaught on West Bank and Gaza. Israeli settlers raided the Palestinian village of Kirbet al-Majam in the occupied West Bank region, burning 3 houses and a number of vehicles. Residents claim the settlers hurled tear gas bombs and fired live ammunition at those trying to tame the fire. In Gaza, a mosque was reportedly destroyed in the southern city of Rafah, while at least 4 were killed in an airstrike in northern Gaza. The IDF claims several Hamas group members were killed for planting explosives in the Palestinian territory. The attacks come as Hamas has agreed to release the Israeli-American soldier Eden Alexander and bodies of 4 others holding dual citizenship. Though Israel wants to extend the first phase of the ceasefire deal, Hamas has insisted on talks for the second phase of the hostage deal. However, U.S. envoy for West Asia, Steve Witkoff, has rejected Hamas's offer. In a statement, the envoy says that Hamas's private demands are entirely impractical without a permanent ceasefire. The White House has also backed Witkoff's statement, saying that Hamas is making a very bad bet. It has also accused Hamas of making entirely impractical demands. The White House says that Hamas is aware of the deadline and the U.S. will respond accordingly if that deadline passes. Meanwhile, a massive rally was held outside Columbia University in New York by demonstrators over the arrest of pro-Palestinian activist Mahmoud Halil. Several protesters called for the release of Halil by holding signs that read, "Free Mahmoud Halil immediately." Amid the protests, the U.S. Justice Department has launched a probe against possible violation of terrorism laws during protests at the Columbia University.
The department's recent actions, which hopefully you've seen at Columbia University in coordination with our law enforcement agency partners, are part of the administration's mission to end anti-Semitism in this country. Just last night, we worked with the Department of Homeland Security to execute search warrants from an investigation into Columbia University for harboring and concealing illegal aliens on its campus. That investigation is ongoing, and we are also looking at whether Columbia's handling of earlier incidents violated civil rights laws and included terrorism crimes. This is long overdue.
And for the latest on that, Associate Press correspondent Julia Franke reports from Jerusalem. Excuse me for that.
The militant group said it would free Idan Alexander, a soldier who was 19 when he was kidnapped from his base on the Gaza border. It said it would also release the remains of 4 others, dual nationals who died in captivity. It's not clear who negotiated this most recent proposal. Hamas and the United States have engaged in recent weeks in direct talks, which has elicited a terse response from Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu immediately cast doubt on the Hamas statement, saying that it marked psychological warfare and that the militant group in actuality was refusing to budge on the deal that Israel wants on the table. Israel's calling for Hamas to release half the remaining hostages in exchange for an extension of the ceasefire and the promise of a lasting truce in Gaza.
General Counsel for the AFGE, Rushabh Sanghvi, has raised questions over recent actions by the Trump administration and Elon Musk. Sanghvi has accused them of improperly firing federal employees. Sanghvi has highlighted a recent ruling by U.S. District Judge William Alsup, which could have a significant implication for the government approach. The ruling ordered the reinstatement of thousands of federal employees, specifically probationary workers. He added that the AFGE sees this as a critical setback for the Trump administration's plans to shrink the federal workforce.
It's pretty clear to us that the Trump administration and Elon Musk are indiscriminately and unlawfully trying to eviscerate the federal government, right? What they're trying to do is pretty clear. They're breaking laws and they're firing all of our hardworking federal employees because they're in this for the billionaires, right? And the effects of this are widespread, right? They claim that they're cutting bureaucracy, but that's not what they're really doing. They're taking hardworking Americans out of jobs.
In addition to this, the AFGE has also filed another lawsuit in Seattle involving transportation security workers. The union claims that the administration's actions may have stripped these workers of their collective bargaining rights. The controversy surrounding federal employees intensified after a March 13th ruling which ordered the reinstatement of thousands of employees dismissed by the Trump administration. However, the Trump administration and Elon Musk are yet to publicly respond to the AFGE's allegations. Meanwhile, a dozen of USAID staff for the agency's Global Health Bureau were honored with hugs and applause on Friday. This is after the staff packed up their offices amid recent job cuts. The workers were given a clap out, a tradition of applauding employees as they leave, marking the end of their time with the agency. Under a new order, all the non-essential workers at USAID or USAID are being placed on leave, and around 1,600 employees in the U.S. will be cut. According to a report, critical medical supplies such as oxygen and life-saving drugs for diseases like tuberculosis and HIV are stuck in warehouses and on ships worldwide due to President Donald Trump's move to freeze foreign aid.
The impact of these programs is really pretty phenomenal, literally saving lives every day. So to see this all taken down in such an incredibly fast and horrible way is pretty devastating.
Hours after being sworn in, Canada's 24th Prime Minister Mark Carney has taken a tough stance against the Trump administration. He says that Canada will never, ever be a part of the United States.
Personally, I've been clear. The ministers behind me, I think to an individual, when asked, have been clear that we will never, ever, in any way, shape, or form, be part of the United States. America is not Canada. Look at the ceremony we just had. You could not have had that ceremony. You would not have that ceremony in America. Look at the cabinet behind me. You would not have that cabinet in America. You do not have that cabinet in America. We are a very fundamentally different country.
Carney went on to say that confronting Trump's tariffs will be a top priority for his government. He hopes both governments could work together to advance both countries' interests. Canada is in the middle of a storm after Trump returned to power in January as its relations with a southern neighbor collapsed following trade war and annexation threats. In the meantime, Canadian officials have said that they are looking to set up a call between Trump and Carney in the coming days. Carney views the Trump administration as the greatest challenge Canada has faced in a generation and is set to visit Paris and London to reinforce alliances with other allies as ties with the U.S. deteriorate. However, the path for Mark Carney doesn't look easy, with reports saying that Canada could be headed for a general election in weeks. In the meantime, Canadian opposition leader Pierre Poilievre has congratulated Carney.
But today I'd like to begin by congratulating, begin by wishing Mr. Trudeau a happy retirement and all the best to his family, and congratulating Mr. Trudeau's economic advisor, Mark Carney, on becoming Prime Minister only 3 months after he moved his headquarters out of Canada to New York, moving jobs away from Canada.
On the sidelines of the G7 summit, Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly, in a stern message to U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, made it clear that Canada's sovereignty is not up for debate. Joly's remarks come a day after Trump repeated his call for Canada to join the U.S.
We had a very long conversation, the Secretary and I. I wanted to be able to have a frank conversation with him. Of course, Canada's sovereignty is not up for debate, and we had a long conversation on tariffs and trade.
On the issue of tariffs, the Canadian Foreign Minister says that the tariffs will ultimately hurt the Americans. Time now for Wild DNA Sports. The focus of the cricketing world now shifts to the IPL from the Champions Trophy. It is not just a change from international cricket to franchise cricket, but also a shift in dynamics amongst players. Hardik Pandya, who was playing under Rohit Sharma in the Champions Trophy, will not only be Sharma's captain, but will also be leading the side that includes New Zealand skipper Mitchell Satner. That is because all three of them play for the Mumbai Indians. The squad also includes Surya Kumar Yadav, who is India's T20 captain, that is T20I captain. Pandya replaced Rohit as Mumbai captain last year amid much controversy, given Rohit Sharma had led the side to 5 IPL titles. Although there was resistance from the Mumbai fans early on, Pandya eventually won them over. But there was no such change in leadership in the Indian team, where Rohit Sharma remains the ODI and Test captain. That creates a somewhat difficult dynamic between the two players, since both players